All right, here we are. Welcome, everybody. Sorry we can't see you. We set this up as a webinar, and we did that intentionally because we weren't sure how many people were going to show up. And so just to keep it clean, so to speak, and not have boxes with people all over the place, we just decided to set it up this way. We still would like to hear from you. And so if you have questions or comments, please use the chat box. And, you can, of course, interact with each other. But if you have questions for us, what we'll try to do is save a little bit of time at the end of our discussion so that we can go back and look at your questions and make sure that we've answered all of them, or if there's more questions. So anyway, that's kind of how we're going to structure this today. You may have guessed, since you signed up for this, I'm Jeff, and this is Maria. And so the, kind of the format that we had for today was we wanted to have this a little bit more of a discussion between Maria and I about some of the work that we do and how it interfaces. And so specifically, my background is really as a psychologist and neuroscientist studying the brain. And so over the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of work looking at the brains of psychics and mediums and energy healers, that sort of thing. And of course, Maria's background, I'll let her introduce herself, but, her background is very different, right? Because she is a spirit artist, and we're going to get into that in a lot of detail. Like, what does that mean? What the heck is that actually? And I haven't actually got to measure Maria's brain yet. We've known each other now for 9 years.
Yes, I know. It's crazy.
Something like that. We actually met at a mediumship workshop way back when, and then didn't really stay connected too much in between, and then recently over the last couple of years have kind of reconnected and been working more together. So I'm excited to do more with Maria directly, and we've got a retreat workshop coming up live in Cape Cod that I'm really excited about, where we'll be able to join forces. So Maria, do you want to say anything else before we kind of jump in and I just start asking you a bunch of questions?
Go ahead, and maybe we'll be fleshing out exactly what's going on in my brain as you open the format with questioning. How's that?
Sounds good.
All right, go ahead.
So we wanted to start off by kind of like exploring a little bit about what Maria does and understanding that. And we've got some pictures and some images will pop up too to kind of help explore this. But so the first question, Maria, is what the heck is spirit art? I know the first time I heard that term, I was like, what is that? Now, people that are watching this, they may already know, but just in case, can you kind of explain that for us?
Sure. It's a pretty big topic, Jeff. Okay. It depends on where you're from, what type of organization you're involved with, what your background is, what your religion, your source of your inspiration is. But to narrow everything down, I think specifically for me, spirit is about living a beautiful life, I guess, for lack of a better term. But if you're working with a specific organization, and for spiritualism, for instance, or if you're involved with some sort of demonstration, there are specific things that have to be specific criteria, for lack of a better term, that have to be followed. And that is drawing the face of a loved one before you know exactly who you're connected with.
So wait a minute, this is a common practice in like the spiritualist church?
It is. Well, I think in the spiritualist church, we always like to make sure that we have a spirit come through during service. It's called community. And many people are able to draw the face of a spirit. Now, it is a unique skill, but I feel like it's something that people can develop in complete surprise, really. I've seen people with no artistic background draw a face because they're connected. But I don't want to digress here for just a second, because to me, spirit art is also about the quality of your life. What are you really seeing in your life? And as an artist, we learn how to see. But as human beings, I don't think that we really ever cultivate that art as a special thing. Like, how do we see? So as a medium, I'm constantly learning about how spirit comes to me. And it was a surprise, truly, that I was able to do spirit art. It really was. It was astonishing, and it is a miracle. So, is it something that I can predict, like a circus performer? No, but we do our best.
So essentially, you're connecting when you're doing spirit art. You're connecting with some sort of discarnate entity on the other side, and the information you're getting, you're able to translate it into a piece of art that if I'm understanding right, is always usually a picture of what they looked like when they were embodied.
Ah, yes, and that's a tricky question too, because spirit helpers often influence our work. So many people can see spirit. I don't see spirit. I rely on my guides to help me develop the picture while I'm in a connected state, for lack of a better term. But it's not just a face. Spirit art is not just a face. Spirit art can be the essence of a memory. The most beautiful thing I had ever seen about spirit art, so simply put, was a red balloon. A woman received a red balloon as a pictorial in her mind. She drew the red balloon, and it was immediately taken. Oh, that's what happened when my son passed. We released red balloons. I mean, that is spirit art. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a face. It just depends on the environment in which you're working. Because a spirit art can be healing too. You can make a picture for someone and send it to them and have that emanation of love come through with intention.
So when you connect in and then you get some sort of I'm going to call it inspiration, right? So you're drawing, although it sounds like maybe if you're drawing or painting, you're not necessarily in your conscious mind. You're maybe in a different state. But so do you get other information about, like, let's say it is a face, right? So you draw a face. Do you get other information about that individual besides what they look like, or is it just kind of a physical representation?
Oh no, we have to bring evidence through. If we're working within the spiritualist church or we're working in a demonstration, it's imperative that we bring the evidence through as well, not just a face. I mean, that's exciting in and of itself to draw the face, but sometimes you can hear spirit say, that's not my nose. And then you go, okay, I'm doing my best, and but it'll be the shock of hair or the eyes or a certain jawline that is really true. I don't know very many spirit artists that can plant it every single time, and it's exactly like a photograph that can be shown. I think that's rare, but it's also brilliant, and what a miracle.
Yeah.
I hope for the best, but I do feel that evidence is clear when you're speaking. You must be able to say some very key pieces about the person you're drawing.
Right. So you are getting additional information about
Absolutely.
what their personality was like, or, other things
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
connected to them. So maybe this would be a good time to put up, we put together a few slides to show some of this, because of course, describing it is one thing, but it can be nice for people to be able to see what the heck we're talking about. And we actually have a little video of you doing a spirit art demonstration. And so let me share that. Great.
There it is.
Okay. So is this your studio, or maybe an older studio?
No, this was taken at Pine Grove Spiritualist Camp this last summer. And it often prior to the demonstration, I will do a number of drawings as quickly as I can. to kind of get myself into the pocket of things, so to speak. But also, I feel like when I'm doing a service, if I only have time for 2 or 3 drawings, it's a shame if a group of people show up. So I try to get as many spirits through with the drawings prior to service. So this is what was taken while I was working just before service.
Okay. So let me just hit the play button so that people can kind of see what you're doing here.
All right. You know, the two-handed thing is pretty important for me. It makes things a lot easier, quicker, more efficient.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because, you just busted out a face in about 20 seconds there.
You know, it's crazy too, because I'm not completely aware of what's really happening, although I'm much better at holding that that very light altered state. In the beginning, I wasn't. My hands were flailing around and, I was not really conscious of things that were happening. So I was really just trying to stay connected with spirit. But I think it's a multi-dimensional task that they put us through when they have us come through, when they bring themselves through like that.
So you would characterize yourself as being in a light trance state.
Yeah, I would use it. I use the word altered state because I know exactly where I am. And at times, when you get into a deeper trance state, you really are unaware. Your spirit team takes over and tells you where you're going. But yeah, there you go. So that didn't take long.
No. So I'm gonna stop sharing for just a second. We'll come back to that in a minute because we have some other examples of some of the work that you've done alongside an actual photograph of whoever it was that you brought through. But I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of kind of being in a light trance. So when you're doing this work, are you aware of the environment, or are you just kind of like in a zone, so to speak, where it's you're just doing the thing, you're just moving?
I'm aware of where I am, and I'm also aware that, especially during a demonstration, that I'm speaking as well. So I have to address. Again, I think it's a multi-dimensional task, and that you really learn to sort out as you begin to work, because everything has changed up for me so very much since the very beginning of this process.
So when you say multi-dimensional,
that's a strange concept, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it is and it's not, but I'm just thinking of how that concept applies here. Like, how do you mean multidimensional? What do you mean by that when you're doing this kind of work?
I really, well, I have to be aware of where I am standing. I have to be aware of the environment and in which I am standing, and help to bring spirits through clearly, and try to pick up. It's kind of like you're trying to be in a big giant snow globe, and you're trying to pick up as much information as possible. And sometimes it's actually physical. So when I say multidimensional, I feel like it's a tasking situation where I'm trying to bring in every single thing that I could possibly feel and see and know, using all the clairs, but and then just giving up. I think that's the best part about it. It's the surrender of trust, and say, look, just use my mouth, use my hands, but I'm still fully aware.
Mm-hmm. And so the using two hands thing, so that's interesting because you said you feel like that's a really important aspect of this for you. And I can imagine for myself, if I tried to draw with my left hand, that would look like a mess. And
is that your non-dominant hand?
That is my non-dominant hand. Yeah. And so, but like looking at the picture here and I've seen many of your other pieces, I wouldn't be able to tell which hand is your dominant and which one's not.
Right. But I am usually a dominant. My right hand is my dominant hand. But we can teach each other to use our non-dominant appendages, our feet. It's amazing what can come through your body if you just let yourself relax. So it is a skill, I think, that we can develop.
So, do you feel like, and this starts to get into my territory, which we'll get into here in a minute, but so do you feel like using both hands simultaneously, it's requiring you to use both sides of your brain in a different way than if you were just using your dominant hand?
That's really well put. I couldn't have figured that out on my own. That's well put. True.
Well, and again, I'm a little ahead of myself, but you said you're usually right hand dominant.
Yeah.
Which, the way the brain works is that things cross over. And so your right hand is controlled by your left hemisphere, which is more language oriented. And so when you're using your left hand, that's more right brained, which is probably more important for some of this work of kind of being more open and present focused. It's kind of, so it's interesting. You're kind of doing both at the same time.
Well, when you talk about, I know in other instances, you've talked about shutting down the left and the right brain and trying to activate certain things. But I guess for me, if I shut down one or the other, maybe that wouldn't work as efficiently. Or maybe if I shut down both of them and I learn to do something else, is that what you get into when you're in a trance state?
I don't know. I mean, I suspect, and again, we'll get into this in a few more minutes when we kind of get more over to some brain stuff, but I suspect that what you're doing is creating a flexibility between the left and the right so that you can access kind of both in a fluid way rather than kind of being stuck in one or the other. That's what I would suspect, but I don't know. We have to map your brain next time I'm out there and find out what the heck is happening.
Okay.
Let me show a few pictures of some of your work because I'd love to hear, who these people are and like what was going on here. So let's share the screen again. Did it come up correctly this time?
It says art demonstration.
Yep, great. So, whoop.
Not that. Oh, okay. Hello. There you are,
Okay.
John.
So we've got this gentleman here. So, and again, just to clarify for the viewers, right? Like you didn't know this guy. You drew this, and then somewhere, somehow, somebody said, "Oh, I know who that is," and then they showed you this picture.
Yeah. I in the beginning of my adventure here with spirit art, I would draw a lot in the morning. Before I went into my practice, I'm an esthetician and a healer, and so I would draw, and this was a particular face that enchanted me because he was such a happy, lovely man. So I brought the drawing in, and sometimes they do say, "Bring me along." And this guy said, "Bring me along." And it was his wife that was my first client that day. And it took a few days and she said, "Oh, those aren't his eyes. Those are not his eyes." But when you look at the drawing, you say, "No, his eyes were hazel. I drew them as blue." But the elements, the feeling, and she said, "Oh, he didn't have that much hair when he passed." But so he had some hair sooner or later, some portion of his life. But so that's how that one came about. And what a lovely man he was. And he had a lot to say to her.
Uh-huh. So then when you're doing this work with a client, you're also kind of doing sort of what we might think of as more of a typical mediumship reading. You're communicating with the spirit of this guy and kind of sharing what he has to say.
Yes, yes, yes. And he was talking briefly while I was drawing with him, but he really he waited. I mean, the spirit world is excessively intelligent. We underrate everything. We think we are in charge. We are not in control of anything. So anyway, that worked out very well.
What about this guy?
Oh, Jeff, you know what happened? Can you remember what happened during that session that we were all together in? This was crazy. I was in one of your groups, and I had woken up really early prior to that session that we were all in together. And this guy was just on it. He was like, "Hurry up and get up." And I don't usually draw with this kind of technique, like so dark and affirmative like that. It was like nothing I'd ever drawn. And it was still on my easel. And here I was in your group. And one of the participants said, "That's my uncle right now." And it was crazy. And then we started working with that trio, helping to see if we could connect with our psychic minds. It was awesome. So I think perhaps we were already connecting with our loved ones prior to that experience, but he was powerful. He was very powerful.
So does that process happen a lot? So with both of these that we've looked at so far, you kind of described that, you had this urge or whatever to go draw, and then somebody that day, it was relevant, it was related to that person. Does that happen a lot where you're like, oh, I need to draw this thing, and then later the same day or the next day you have a client or you're in a class or whatever, and that's where the connection is made?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's very exciting. And it takes your breath away, because for me, I'm just, oh, what a lovely spirit. Oh, how lovely. I'm just having fun drawing. And that's when I feel much more relaxed anyway. It's very hard to do it in a demonstration. But when you're sitting in your own space and you're just relaxing and you're practicing, you're just practicing what you love to do. And then to have something like this come through, it's always mind blowing every time. Every time.
Cool. So it's almost like the spirits, I don't want to put words in their mouth or your mouth, but it's almost like they kind of know you're going to see.
Oh, yes.
Like they know what's going to happen. They know, oh, you're going to see my loved one later today. So, hey, I'm knocking on the door right now. And,
yes. Yeah, they line up before service. They line up before a dem. I think they're out there saying, "All right, you guys," and they're bringing in their friends. So in case somebody else needs to talk to somebody, that I really feel that that's how they work. I really do.
Interesting. So we've got one more here. Who's this guy?
Okay, this was a very distant relative of a woman that was in one of my workshops. And I had assigned the group a specific thing, and I was killing time while they had this, exercise to do. And when they came back, one of the gals she said, "I'm going to pull that photograph out right now." And she left and came back with that. And that was her, one of her, I think it was a second generation, an uncle. Now, they often tell us not to bring through someone that's more than a second generation past, because oftentimes we don't have that kind of evidence. But to me, at that moment in that space, that was evidence enough that she is on the right track. He just said, "You're on the right track. Keep going. Believe in yourself." And it was I call that a drive-by.
Uh-huh. So, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second just so we can see each other more easily.
Okay.
So you've been talking kind of about this idea of evidence or doing an evidential drawing, and of course, one aspect of that seems like it's if somebody says, "Oh, I know who that is. That's my uncle," or whatever. What other kinds of information would be considered evidential? Like what else?
Sometimes we can do an orograph, and that's just a lovely, fanciful way of saying that we can connect with your psychic abilities as a sitter, and find some comfort through color, or say you're a woman is going to be publishing a book. You've never seen her before, and you draw a book with a big heart on it. And she says, "Oh my God, does that mean I don't know if that means you're going to be a published author. All I know is I drew a book with a heart on it. So you must love to write." And so that's a wonderful way to incorporate little, what I call iconography in your drawings, and everyone can doodle. Everyone can doodle. So if you're a medium and you're just starting to doodle like that, and you don't even know what you're doing, you're picking up all kinds of wonderful information. So with that, the drawing aspect of spirit art is endless. It's endless. And it's also a way to self-soothe. We learn to do that as little children. You pick up a box of crayons and you go for it. And it was a box of crayons that started me to draw. You asked me that a while ago. What was the first experience you ever had? I didn't know I was a spirit artist. I have been trained as an artist, self-taught mostly, but it wasn't any skill that I ever acquired that taught me to do this. It was with a box of crayon, a gray crayon, as a matter of fact. The guy said, all right, we're going to make some pictures. And I drew this face with a gray crayon. And my partner said, that's my uncle. And the guy said, you might be a spirit artist. so
and
that's
you said, what the heck's a spirit artist? It's
okay, go to England and learn how to do that. And then, so that's how it works.
So let me ask this, right? Because I'm assuming that some of the folks that are watching this now or might watch it later, would be curious to try this for themselves. So is it literally as simple as like, okay, set up, get a pad of paper, get some crayons, and then what, right? Then what do I do?
There are a number of different types of exercises that I can lead someone through, but specifically about the face. I mean, I can't wait to see you in person because I can teach you to draw a face in like 5 easy steps. That's my method. And it just gives people a foundation to hold on to, even if the nose is this long and the eyes are this wide. But there's an element of love that comes through the paper, that vibration of another person that can be spoken to. So I guess, does that answer your question? Yes, I can help you. I can teach you to do that. And I think it's about being fearless and being willing to try something new and get out of your comfort zone. So we can set some fires, we can illuminate some kind of passion that it's about the unseen world, connecting to that.
Yeah. And so where does creativity come into this? Because, what's the role of creativity? It sounds like maybe that's implied in some of what you were just saying.
Well, you've got some interesting questions here today. Were you up all night? What's going on? Can you ask that again in a different way? You see how, I don't know, I can't see anybody's faces, but you see who I'm dealing with here? The doctor. Okay, good. Ask again.
So, so on one level, when we think about art, most of us think about, oh, that's, sort of creative expression, right? You're using your creativity to express something. And then there are people who are like, I don't have a creative bone in my body, right? I'm very analytic, I'm whatever. Okay. And so I'm curious, like, well, what is the role of creativity in this? Because you already said you don't have to be an artist, right? And so it's kind of like, well, okay, but I would imagine there's some level of creativity that's involved in this process. Or maybe that can, maybe exploring creativity is a way to unlock some of this.
There you go. I think we are all creative, incredibly brilliant creative souls. We have, you're cooking, you're working, you're driving, you're creating your family, you're expressing colors in your home, your living room, your clothes. There isn't a person alive that is not living creatively. It's just focusing on a specific type of creativity or that aspect within you that can be ignited. And we can nurture that kind of thing. Nobody wakes up knowing how to make a fabulous soup. You kind of watch or you learn or you become inspired to cook. And even if you burn 1,000 things, you figure it out sooner or later. So that's creativity.
So then from that perspective, are there things that people can do to kind of unlock their creative potential, right? So that maybe they can access some of this ability more easily? Oh,
you know it. I mean, first I have to just say that that thing that you have, that AVE, the audio visual entrainment thing, that helped me to calm down enough in my mind to be receptive, because I'm on a hyper state. I think my mind, I run on a nervous state. I'm always waiting for the shoe to drop. And when I started working with that thing, it helped me to calm my mind enough. And then I go down and I paint and I have a wonderful experience. And sometimes that helps me to more easily drop into that space of, I guess, complete relaxation, for lack of a better way to do it. You open up a door. You stop your mind from saying, oh, you're stupid, you can't do this. Oh, who do you think you are? Picking up this thing at, at whatever age you are. No. Those things quiet down. So that's the fascinating stuff about what I'm learning with you, is the way the brain cycles. The brain actually cycles.
Well, I mean, sure, there's certain rhythms in the brain, but I think the aspect that we're kind of talking about here with the audiovisual entrainment, we can touch on that in a little bit more detail once we kind of get into the brain stuff. So that if people are going like, what the heck's audiovisual entrainment? We'll talk about that some more in a few minutes. But so before we transition to brain stuff, like what would be one tip you could give people watching this where they're kind of like, okay, I want to try this. What would you say? Like, what would be a tip or a tool or something that they could do on their own to, either start doing this work or to start to explore their creativity?
This is called a silent pause. Am I stalling? Let's see. I got 15,000 things that are coming through my brain at one time. Learn to brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. Pick up the cup of coffee with your non-dominant hand. Become a little bit more open-minded about very simple tasks in life. Washing the dishes. I mean, it's nothing like be here now. That's kind of the Zen thing. But also, I like to say, start out by keeping a journal and helping yourself to connect more deeply with your spiritual self. Use words that you haven't, pull out a thesaurus if I'm aging myself here, and see if you can find a new word, and then use that word. See, it's not just about, I want to be an artist. An artist learns to see their life in full detail. And that's a wonderful quote from a wonderful American artist named Robert Henry. He wrote a book called The Artist, Seeing. Oh, that's not it. See, my mind is blank. The Artist's Way. And it's about seeing and being in the real now experience and learning to adjust your new thought, being open-minded.
It sounds like some of what you're saying is going to connect really nicely to kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And, it sounds like some of it is developing flexibility. So in my world, we would call it psychological flexibility. And so that kind of being open-minded, and being flexible in how you see and do things. People seem to get really rigid, if you don't actively work on being flexible and open. Humans, we love our habits. We get into a habitual way of doing and thinking, and then it limits us. This is my perspective. This is my perception, right? And so it sounds like partly what you're saying is like, you got to keep yourself flexible. So using your non-dominant hand, doing things you wouldn't normally do, looking at things a different way, right? Like that, all of that is keeping your brain kind of limber so that you can access other possibilities, other things that maybe you weren't aware of before. Is that fair?
That's beautifully put. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because the habit is the death of us. And the fear it puts the lid on our life, and our unwillingness to see new possibilities just shuts us down piece by piece. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have tools.
We do have tools. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe this is a good time to transition to some brain stuff. Because of course, you know, in the work that I do, I'm always kind of curious about like, okay, kind of like we just said, like you were describing this and I'm like, okay, like how would I translate that into my world? And are there ways that we can use our understanding of the brain to also help develop these abilities, right? Like, can we combine sort of science and spirituality, right? In some ways that are, you know, help people advance in this kind of work and in their personal growth. And so one of the things that struck me when we've talked about this before was this kind of left and right brain thing, which we kind of mentioned earlier. I'm going to put the slides back up because I have a couple of them just to kind of make my point.
Do you remember, Jeff, do you remember the book that came out, Drawing on the Left Side of Your Brain?
On the right side of the brain.
On the right side of your brain. See, I don't know. What
Yeah.
brain? And that was such a big deal. I mean, but look at where we've come in just that short period of time. So there's no telling what we can do. You can influence, actually, you can influence that part of the brain that opens creativity. You've proven that with Godspot. You've documented this. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. I mean, great, you know, but it's interesting because, you know, like some of the work that I've done within this area, you know, it's not like it's all original, right? Like other people have looked at this and they've had these thoughts, but it's kind of like taking the information that's out there and how can we bring it together in a way that kind of makes sense for what we're doing? You know, how can we make it applied? You know, and scientists are horrible at that. They come up with some idea and then they just leave it out there. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Right. And so I think that's where my interest is great. We have this understanding. Now what? Now what do we do with it? And so, you know, kind of this idea of brain lateralization, right? That the left and right hemispheres do different things. It's an interesting thing because, you know, having been a student of the brain for a long time, I've kind of poo-pooed a lot of this stuff because in the, you know, what do you want to say? Popular media, this gets overblown, right? You know, like women are from Venus, men are from Mars kind of a thing, right? It's like exaggerated and oversimplified to the point that in some ways it's not very helpful. But the reality is the left and the right brain do different things. Even though there's a lot of overlap, the left brain is much more, you know, really you can break it down, I think, to the idea of language, that the left brain for most people is highly verbal. And I think that's really important because when you are verbal, when you're putting words onto things, right away, what that means is that you are analyzing something. You're taking information from the world and now you're limiting it. As soon as you put a word on something, you limit it, right? I mean, I think of how many different religions say you can't actually talk about God because as soon as you use words to describe God, you've limited God, right? So, you know, Taoism, Judaism, right? Like all these religions, like you can't talk about God because you've already messed it up. As soon as you use words, you've screwed it up. And words limit, right? And so already just by using your left brain, you're limiting information. And it also has to be very sequential and logical and analytic in order to put it into a language base that people understand. Now, the right side of the brain, for most people, is not language oriented. It's much more of this experiential sort of being in the moment, sort of sensory, right? And so it makes sense that we think of that as the more artistic side, the more creative, artistic kind of element of how we process information. And of course, both are important. But
what's random sequencing?
Boy, that's a good question. It sounds like those don't really go together, do they? Random sequencing. Actually, I don't know what they're talking about when they say that, because it doesn't make any logical sense, right? It's like random sequencing. How can it be random and sequenced? I'm sure there's something behind that, but I don't know what it is.
Hey.
So this slide's just kind of making my point from a research study that came out a couple of years ago. And, I said it but didn't say it, that most people are left hemisphere dominant for language. There are some people where it's switched. And by the way, it's not, we used to think there was like, oh, left-handed people, their brains are flip-flopped, how they do things. And it's like, that's actually not true. Being left-handed doesn't necessarily mean your brain is organized differently. Most people, their brains are organized the same.
Oh.
Anyway, there's this structure right down the middle of the brain, the corpus callosum, that connects the right and the left hemispheres, right? So that they can talk to each other, so they can interact. And what's interesting is in this study, what they found was that when we engage in language, so when we're using words, the corpus callosum inhibits the right hemisphere. So you don't have access to the right hemisphere when you're talking, when you're using words to analyze something. And so to me, this is really important. And I think it gets to some of your work, right? Because when you're doing art, you're not talking right off the bat. And you're using both hands, like we were saying, right? So somehow you're accessing both hemispheres of the brain at the same time, right? That you're not caught in this language loop that shuts off the right hemisphere. So it's actually brilliant, right? That you're using art as a mechanism. Again, I'm talking from my nerdy neuroscientific perspective, that you're using art as a way to access the right hemisphere so you don't get stuck in words.
Oh.
It's brilliant. And what's interesting is, some of the research I've done before looking at mediums and other, psychic abilities, you see this differentiation between the left and the right hemisphere frequently. That and the right hemisphere is usually the one that there's more change going on. So when people are doing a psychic reading or a mediumship reading, it's usually the right hemisphere where things change the most. And so this is just a quick screenshot of a couple of brain images from a young man that I studied who was telepathic with his mother, with his primary caregiver. And when I mean telepathic, I mean 100% telepathic, like knows exactly what mom is thinking and what's in her mind. And when he does this, you can see that the 7 and 8 hertz activity, that's in the theta range of brain waves. So for people that know something about brain waves, theta is kind of that slower brain wave. But it also allows us to access sort of subconscious information, right? It kind of like theta is that brainwave that allows us to tune into something bigger, maybe the collective unconscious, right? And so you see it light up very distinctly on his right hemisphere. Like nothing's happening on the left. And then when you look at these coherence patterns between alpha and beta, they're very different and they're very lateralized. So the beta becomes hypercoherent on the right side, and then the alpha becomes hypocoherent, it's disconnected on the left side. So, when I see these things and then I think about kind of what you're doing, again, I feel like it's a really perfect kind of a blend. Were you going to say something, Maria?
No, I just, no, it hit me. One other thing. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. And so not to linger on this slide too much, because there's a whole lot going on here, but I was trying to put together data from 4 different psychics that I had studied their brains. And I was looking at where the changes were when they were doing a psychic reading. And so I'm just using the arrows to demonstrate if there was an increase or a decrease. And then the colors are indicating whether it was fast or slow brain waves that were changing. And again, what you can see is that by a long shot, there was way more changes in the right hemisphere than on the left hemisphere. So when we kind of look at all the data. So again, it suggests, right, that there's something really important for doing this kind of work, mediumship or psychic work, that you need to be able to access that right hemisphere. If you can't access the right hemisphere, you're in trouble. Or at least the way I think about it, it may not be very effective, right? If you're just stuck in your left hemisphere.
Well, that kind of sounds, this question might be stupid, Jeff, but let me ask you, can you go back to that other slide? Or no, this slide will be perfect. When we receive information, and we're talking about this as one of the lobes is quieting down and being sent, which part of the brain is actually receiving the words again? Like from spirit, say. Where are we receiving that information in our brains?
Yeah, receptive language. So, when we're taking language in to understand it, right? So it could be reading or it could be hearing or whatever, is largely this sort of rear area on the left side. So it's kind of language comprehension, right? Understanding language. Expressive language is more up in the front, up here on the left.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes you will see some changes in those areas in psychics and mediums based on how they work. And how the language is coming through. But more often than not, even though they're hearing language that's coming through, it's interesting because it often doesn't seem to be registering in the same parts of the brain that normal language registers in.
Right. So is that the God spot? Is that what we talk about with the God spot?
Well, the God spot's over on the other side. It's over here where all these arrows are. And it's on the right side. And the God spot has to do with boundaries, right? Boundaries between self and other. And so I think that's a reason why we see a lot of change in functioning in this area, because if we can relax the boundaries between ourself and others, or between ourselves and the spirit world, then information can come in, right? If we have rigid boundaries and it's like, I'm Jeff, I live in this meat suit, right? I'm not connected to anything or anybody. Well, then, how are you going to access information? You can't. So somehow you got to get this area to stop doing what it normally does, to do something different. And so I think that's a good reason why, that probably is why we see so much change there. It's a good question. So I wanted to kind of jump ahead just a little bit because, we're kind of talking about, how the brain is involved in some of this work. And so given that it's pretty clear based on what we've talked about that the right hemisphere is really important for doing this work. So, this is where that applied aspect comes in for me. Like, okay, cool. So now what? Like, how do I get my right brain to be more, part of the game here? And so it's interesting because there's a couple of ways that we can do this. And we can do it by activating the right hemisphere, right? Which is probably what you're doing when you're engaged in art. You're activating that right hemisphere. It's engaged in a different way. Or we can shut off the left hemisphere, right? Like, can we just shut off the language? And it's interesting because different styles of meditation do this naturally. So we were talking before about things that people could do to help open up these abilities. And actually, mindfulness practices where you're in the present moment and you're simply being aware of whatever your experience is, but without judgment, which means you're not putting a label on it.
Right.
Which means you're not turning it into a story. So you're essentially not doing the left hemisphere stuff, because the left hemisphere wants to make stories. It's talking to you and going like, this is what reality is, and this is how I perceive things. But if you don't do that and you don't think about it, but you just experience it, that's the right hemisphere. So mindfulness is a great practice to start to learn how to be in that space. And you described it when you were talking about your art process, your spirit art. You didn't use the word mindfulness, but you were essentially describing that. Being aware of your body, being in the present moment, sort of not necessarily paying attention to a bunch of other random stuff, right? And then, the other meditation process that can work really well is more of a quiet mind type practice, right? Where you're essentially learning to shut off that inner dialogue, so that you don't have that constant stream of inner self-talk that's going on, right? So both of those are great practices just by themselves, to start to, I think, tap into that right hemisphere more. So meditation is a biggie.
Yeah, it is, definitely. Oh my God. Just, on a quick note of meditation in our mediumship world, meditation is such a big word, isn't it? So many people think in terms of 1,000 different things when mediumship comes. The meditation in mediumship comes to mind. And then they talk about it as ascension, sitting in the power. And it's just a multifaceted word, isn't it? So when you do specific meditations, I know that through some of your books and some of your teachings, you've got very specific directives. And this is what is fascinating to me, because once I started hanging on to some of those principles, things became a lot more, I don't want to say black and white, but so much more, I had boundaries. I had more directives. So it was more of I learned how to use these different aspects as ways to control my own environment. Is it too many words?
Yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, that is kind of one of our approach. So the work that I do with the Neuro Meditation Institute, it's really designed to do that, right? It's like, well, how can different styles of meditation affect the brain differently? And what are the potential consequences of that? And so it just makes it a little bit more organized and where we can characterize what the heck we're doing with meditation. So it's not just this weird amorphous big giant thing, right? That people are like, oh, what does that mean exactly? It's like, well, we need to understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just wanted to briefly mention that there's lots of other ways to shift the brain too. So we were talking about cognitive flexibility, psychological flexibility, and also this idea of the left and right hemisphere. And so we talked about meditation. Qigong is it's one of my favorite practices. I've been doing it for a very long time. And, I feel like it's really powerful because it's built into that system where you're using your body with movement and breath and coordinating all these things. I wonder if it's a little bit like the spirit art, right? Like you're coordinating all of this stuff, but then can you do it in a way where it's effortless and you're not trying to force anything, right? It's like moving through air. And so I feel like Qigong has a lot of built-in elements that might be really useful for some of this, besides the fact that you're cleansing and purifying the energy in your in and around your body, which probably can't hurt anything, right?
Plus, the act in and of itself is empowering you. You are working to build the energy in Qigong, not just build it, but then release it.
Yes. Yeah. And then, a couple of other quick things. So you were mentioning the audiovisual entrainment, which there's a couple of different ways that we work with this. One is, kind of what you were describing, where we've got these glasses that people can put on. Of course, I don't have a pair sitting right here, but they've got lights built into the eye set, and the lights flicker on and off at certain frequencies. And there they are. And the lights flicker on and off at certain frequencies and then can essentially nudge the brain. And so one of the programs that people really like is actually shutting down the left hemisphere and activating the right hemisphere. And we can do that because the lights and the glasses are split in the visual field. So we can send one frequency to the left hemisphere and a different frequency to the right hemisphere. So we can actually do that very directly. Another technique that I really like a lot, it's a little more cumbersome, is using something called a stroboscopic light. And actually the picture on the slide right now, that's what they're doing. You can't see the light because it's above them, but it's kind of this giant contraption with a whole bunch of lights built into it. And the different programs, there's the lights flicker and do all kinds of things. And it's very powerful.
I can't wait. I've heard people doing this. They're like, it's a mind-blowing experience. I mean, your life changes. I was like, I can't wait.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you describe it to people and they're like, okay, because you're like, oh, it's psychedelic. And people have these and they're kind of like, oh, all right, you're flashing lights at somebody. And then they do it. And it's amazing because almost everybody within the first 10 seconds, they go, whoa, yeah, whoa. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, yeah, I told you. And then, lots of different kinds of breath work can be really powerful as well. Holotropic breath work. Some people have heard me talk about Janet Mayer before, and, she unlocked some of her superpowers through holotropic breath work. She wasn't trying to, it just happened. And breath work does a lot of different things, right? It can change the blood flow in the brain. It can help us get into certain kind of states, some of those quiet mind states, but also balancing the nervous system. And so one of them that I use is called Soma breathwork practice. It's not quite as intense as holotropic breathwork, but it can facilitate some of that. So there's lots of ways that we can help the brain shift. And of course, these are things that we're going to be doing at our retreat workshop. So for those of you that are interested and, think you might want to explore this in a much more intensive, in-depth, personal way, we're going to be, we've got a nice venue set up in Cape Cod for April 12th through 14th. And we're going to be working together. So we'll be tag teaming. So we'll be doing technology stuff and Qigong stuff and energy stuff and creative stuff. Maria's going to have us draw, doing all kinds of creative things with our non-dominant hand and God knows what.
And non-dominant foot. Don't be afraid.
And non-dominant foot. And we'll be practicing. We'll be practicing psychic skills and spirit communication and all of those things. So the whole point is to use this understanding and this knowledge to see if we can't help all of you unlock your abilities or develop them even further than where they are now.
Yeah, Jeff, I would just want to add every level, because if you've just begun this journey, it's going to be awesome to experience this kind of technology and this kind of support in a brand new way. But if you're a veteran to mediumship, this is mind-blowing, because it's there to bring us the new frontier, so to speak. So whatever level you're at, I feel very strongly that we will be able to nurture and encourage a newer road. Whatever road you're on, you're going to be getting a lot of new details about the next journey that you will be you'll be embarking on.
Yeah,
for sure. All levels.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that. That's an important kind of point. And we have a couple of minutes for questions, and there are a couple of questions in here. And so the one that just popped up, which because it's directly related to what we were just talking about, is the retreat all inclusive, or do we need hotels and meals? Hotels and meals are separate. Although we got a pretty amazing deal on the hotel.
Amazing.
It's crazy how inexpensive it is. Actually, I think it's like $109 $109 a night. Yeah, and it's actually a nice hotel, believe it or not.
We got a pool. They've got golf. They've got massages.
They've got a spa. Yeah,
they've got a yoga room and a weight room. It's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, though that is an extra expense for the retreat. But we got you a pretty good deal. And of course you can contact us on the side and we're happy to answer any questions about that or try to help. Oh, by the way, we also have set up kind of a 3 payment option. So if you want to do the retreat, but you can't come up with all the money up front, that's okay too. Just let us know and we can split that up. And then another question, Maria, I'm starting on my spiritual journey. I'm open-minded, but cannot seem to connect, feel, see, or hear spirits or a higher power. I've only been on this journey for 30-ish days and meditate every day. Any suggestions to give me some hope?
Yes. Be fearless. Again, begin to become aware more deeply in your daily life about how you're waking up, how you're spending your time, how you're brushing your teeth, how you're speaking to others, and also how you feel when you are around certain people. You'll begin to register some of your hits. That's what I call them, hits. Like, I just so strange. I feel like I should call Dorothy, and pick up the phone and call Dorothy. You don't know how many thousands of hits you get every day that you've just dismissed. So I would say be confident. We'd love to see you at the workshop. But also, if you're local, we can put you into a circle. Wherever you are, we hope we can find someone that may be able to work with you. But we're here to support you. And I think you're going to be fabulous just because you are inquiring and you're willing. And that's the key, to be willing to open up to something that we are not aware of today. That's the best of spiritual living, spirit art. Yeah.
I love that. And, I've found that that's been really important for me on my own journey and my own process, is kind of what you mentioned of really noticing, like actually recognizing the synchronicities and, the random things that happen that, or the insights that I get or the hits that I get. I had no idea that there were so many, and I just didn't even pay any attention to them. And if I don't recognize them, they kind of don't count, I would also add some of the things that we talked about the psychological flexibility, right? And you were kind of mentioning that, Maria, but anything you can do to kind of keep your brain limber, right? Like do things that make you a little bit uncomfortable, right? Like try stuff, put yourself in new environments. And some of it can be really easy and simple, right? So one of the examples that I give sometimes talking about this is quick short story. When I used to sit at a Zen center, and it was a small Zen center, and I always sat in the same spot. Every time I came in, I sat in the exact same spot in the Zendo. It was my spot, right? And I asked the monk one day at the end of our session, I said, is it a problem that I always sit in the same spot? And he said, it's only a problem if you're going to be upset if you can't sit in that spot. And I was like, I like that. That's interesting, right? And so it's like, am I attached to it? Yeah. Right? So can I be flexible enough that if I have to sit somewhere else, it's fine. It doesn't matter. In fact, maybe that gives me a whole new perspective, right? And so rather than waiting for somebody else to steal my seat, well, what if I intentionally try a different spot, do something different, right? It can be that simple, but you're sort of challenging the habits, the ways that the brain gets habitual and gets attached to those habitual patterns so that you can open up to something else.
Yes, and absolutely. I just want to add one more thing to that, and to be able to journal just simple words, a few words, to be able to track your success. So when you have a day that you feel completely powerless, or you're questioning your set of skills or your life, you can say, well, wait a minute. Holy mackerel. 3 months ago, I was on fire. So spirit gives you some time to rest sometimes. You're not always going to have the same, I want to use the word chutzpah or something. You're not always going to have everything that you want or you think. That's the part of that flexible brain saying, I'm just going to wake up and see what happens, but I'm going to be willing to operate to the best of my ability within my own capacity. Fearlessness. Maria,
we've hit our time limit.
We did. Wow. We had a lot to say.
We did.
And we didn't think we were going to say anything.
It's yeah, I figured we would fill the time pretty easily. But we did just get one more quick question, so let's put it out there real quick. And if you have to go, we understand, and we appreciate all of you being here. If you have to drop off the call, but we can stick around for a couple more minutes for those of you that want to. Any advice on shifting your mental state quickly to a more psi-receptive in the moment? What is a quick way to slip into a more receptive, intuitive state? That's a great question.
Yeah. For me, Stacy, it's the AVE. It's the entrainment. It's the audiovisual entrainment little box. I call it the Jeff contraption. And but I had to use it repeatedly for a while and spend a bit of time adjusting myself and my mind to what was going on. And then I know now as I use it, I don't use it every day, but when I do use it, I know exactly where my mind needs to go. And for me, it's breath and just using some of those, that noise, that My Noise app that you suggested to us a long time ago, white noise, green noise, pink noise, brown noise. That was very successful for me. So those are my two, and breath. So that would be three. Just sit and breathe and be aware of your breath. And then just kind of be able to still. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are I think those are all great suggestions. And, you know, it's a tricky question, right? Because the way I was reading it anyway, it's like, if I'm sitting here right now and I want to tune into a more intuitive side of my brain right now, right this second, and I don't want to have to go put on lights and all that kind of stuff. It's like, how do I shift right now? And it's like, woof, that's a tricky one, because I feel like that's one of those things that we develop over time. You know, the more that we practice meditation and practice these skills and practice this, it's kind of like mindfulness, right? Like if you do a mindfulness practice, when you start out, you're probably not very good at being mindful during the day, when you're at work, when there's something stressful happening, you know. And then the more you practice mindfulness, the easier it gets. It's like second nature. You don't have to force yourself or make yourself do it. So I feel like part of it is that, which is not a very satisfactory answer, because it's basically like, well, practice more, you know. But for me, what it comes down to is how I'm paying attention. Can I learn to shift the way I'm paying attention? And I don't know how to describe it much more clearly, but as I'm moving through the day in this kind of my normal workflow, I'm very left-brained, right? So how can I all of a sudden shift over into my right brain, just to kind of use the same language we've been using? And so usually that means I need to get up, I need to move, I need to do something different, right? Maybe I do one of Donna Eden's energy medicine things for a second, just to shift my energy, you know, or go outside, like mix it up, like do something different so that I can change my perception. And, you know, Maria said this earlier about being relaxed, right? One of the things I've noticed is that it's much easier for me to pick up information if I'm relaxed. And so it goes back to the breath and some of the other things that Maria was talking about. Well, if I'm stressed and I'm there, there's almost no way I'm going to be picking up subtle information. So how can I help myself downshift my nervous system, right? I don't know. That may or may not be helpful at all, but it's just what kind of came to mind.
Well, you know, my slogan lately is drink water, love God, you know, and hope for the best, actually.
I like it.
But yeah, I wish that there was a magic answer to that
Yeah.
one. I really do. But I just feel that it has a lot to do with, you know, mediumship, and all of this unfolding of the mind has everything to do with to being a better person, being the best we can be. Learning how to be human is not something that we were ever taught in school. So this is brilliant stuff that you're coming out with on the edge of what did I call you the other day? The commander on the edge of the new frontier. It's true, though, when you can speak of this kind of thing in reality and have documentation, thousands of hours that you've documented. It's amazing. Yeah. I just want to thank everybody for coming and
Yeah.
for having attention with us today. And
Yeah.
it's a blessing. It's just, I'm so excited to see everyone again.
Yeah. And we had our emails and our contact information on that previous slide. Hopefully you got that. We're not that hard to find. And we'll also put this video up on YouTube in a few days once we clean it up and whatever. So, if you have more questions for us or want to get in touch, please do. We're fairly easy to find, and we'd be happy to help you in whatever way we can. So anyway, thank you for joining us. Thanks, Maria. It's good talking to you. And have a great rest of your week.
God bless everybody. Be creative.